At 2:14 on February 3, 2026, at the narrow choke point of the Strait of Hormuz, the tactical display of the A/SQ-89V-15 anti-submarine warfare system aboard USS Jack H. Lucas suddenly flashed bright red. A string of unusual low-frequency signals shattered the silence inside the Combat Information Center. Something that should not have been there was sitting less than 60 meters beneath the ship's keel. At that same moment, 40 Iranian EM-53 smart mines switched into acquisition mode and locked onto the American destroyer's gas turbine signature. At such close range, they could break the back of a 10,000-ton warship almost instantly. And that was only the beginning. Surface radar then picked up 12 Iranian fast attack craft racing in, cutting off every escape route and boxing the $2 billion ship into a near-perfect trap. Judging by the enemy's closing speed, the captain had exactly 28 seconds to solve a situation that looked impossible. If the ship accelerated, cavitation noise could trigger the minefield below. If it stayed still, it would become an easy target for shore-based anti-ship missiles. If it opened fire on the approaching boats, the shockwave from its own 127mm gun could set off the mines immediately. Nearly 300 lives were hanging in the balance. But instead of ordering a conventional counterstrike, the captain prepared to make a decision unlike anything found in standard naval doctrine. A move so risky it aimed to turn Iran's own minefield against them. Rewind to 2009, when the U.S. force still believed it had the upper hand. USS Jack H. Lucas was moving at 15 knots through the Strait of Hormuz as part of a freedom of navigation operation near Iranian territorial waters, after Tehran had threatened to close the strait on February 1st. To reduce risk, the Fifth Fleet had sent an Avenger-class minesweeper 2 miles ahead to clear the route. Its returns showed nothing unusual. That, however, was the hidden danger. Iran had not laid its mines at random. Instead, it deployed the EM-53 Smart Ambush variant, equipped with selective acoustic recognition algorithms. These mines ignored the lighter engine noise of the minesweeper and remained dormant. They waited. Then, the moment USS Jack H. Lucas entered the kill zone with its 100,000 horsepower propulsion system, the ship's massive magnetic signature and distinct gas turbine frequencies woke the entire field at once. The trap had been set perfectly. 12 pay-cap 3-class boats, concealed behind rocky outcrops and blending into the crowded flow of commercial traffic, suddenly surged forward at 55 knots. They did not come straight in. Instead, they repeatedly crossed close ahead of the American ship, forcing it into an impossible navigation problem. Now the world's most advanced Spy-6 radar became part of the problem rather than the solution. It was flooded with false contacts from sea clutter and nearby civilian vessels, making it nearly impossible for the Aegis system to lock onto the attack boats without risking neutral oil tankers in the background. If the destroyer turned more than 15 degrees to avoid collision, its stern swing would push it into the densest part of the minefield. If it fired its main gun, the sound pressure could activate the mine's vibration sensors. Iran had forced the United States into a position where every normal defensive response could lead to disaster. Now make your call. If you think the captain can get out of this trap without firing a shot, type 1. If you think a direct clash is unavoidable, type 2. This is how he answered the crisis. Faced with seconds to react, the captain ordered an emergency countermeasure sequence. All stop, emergency degassing. The 10,000-ton destroyer fought against its own momentum as its engines shut down, while degassing coils running along the hull were pushed to maximum power to mask the ship's magnetic signature. The effect was immediate. With their primary guidance source suddenly fading, the EM-53 mines below temporarily lost a solid track and shifted from attack mode back into standby. That brief opening became the crew's only chance. An EMH-60R Seahawk lifted off from the aft deck and lowered its AQS-22 dipping sonar into the water, building a three-dimensional picture of the minefield. At the same time, a Knifefish autonomous underwater vehicle was launched to isolate the communication frequencies connecting the mines within Iran's swarm network. Gliding at a depth of 30 meters, the Knifefish activated narrowband jamming and emitted directional ultrasound designed to convince the nearest mine that the surrounding water had gone completely quiet. For a moment, the tactical display shifted from red to green. It looked like the plan might work, but there was a complication no one had anticipated. Iran had embedded a dead man switch deep inside the minefield's software. The moment mine number 1 remained isolated for more than 30 seconds, the other 39 interpreted that silence as a hostile intrusion. Instantly, they switched into hypersensitive mode, lowering their acoustic trigger thresholds to nearly 0. Now, even the faint hum of the Knifefish's motor sounded enormous to their amplified sensors. 3 nearby mines broke free from their moorings, activated propulsion, and rushed the underwater drone like short-range torpedoes. A deep, muffled blast rolled across the seabed. The million-dollar robot was destroyed, and the shockwaves slammed into the hull of USS Jack H. Lucas, throwing the combat system back into full alert. The minefield was no longer waiting. It was now actively closing in. That underwater blast was also the signal the enemy had been anticipating. Inside the CIC, the Aegis combat system flashed a new warning: anti-ship missile threat detected. Spy 6 had just picked up emissions from the guidance radars of Gadir coastal defense batteries hidden inside caves along the shoreline. At a distance of just 15 kilometers, the margin for reaction was vanishingly small. At the same time, the 12 speedboats shifted into a tightening spiral around the destroyer. The roar of 24 outboard engines merged into a wall of white noise beneath the surface. The A/SQ-89 sonar processing system was overwhelmed. Its processors could no longer separate mine signatures from engine noise. The red dots that marked mine locations blurred, then vanished completely into an acoustic haze. The captain was now effectively blind in the middle of a live minefield, and the danger kept growing. The waves thrown up by the fast boats slammed repeatedly into the destroyer's hull, making fine rudder control almost useless. The 10,000-ton ship began drifting with the current toward the reef line, where the mines were packed most densely. "Captain, permission to fire the 25mm Bushmaster," the weapons officer shouted over the alarms. The answer was no. In hypersensitive mode, even the pressure from the muzzle blast might set off a chain reaction within 200 meters. Iran had created a near-perfect trap. Firing back meant disaster, staying still meant missiles, and drifting meant being pulled deeper into danger. Then, in the middle of that chaos, the captain chose an answer no one expected. He turned to the electronic warfare station and gave a cold, precise order. Activate the non-kinetic attack protocol. Target the enemy boats' hulls. He was not going to destroy the mines with explosives. He was going to confuse them using physics. The electronic warfare officer immediately brought up the Sea-Whip Block 3 system, one of the Flight 3 destroyer's most guarded advantages. The active phased array antennas on the superstructure stopped passive scanning and began concentrating radio frequency energy into extremely narrow beams aimed directly at the aluminum hulls of the 12 PACAP 3 boats circling nearby. The objective was not to fry electronics. It was to exploit structural resonance. Under intense RF exposure, the conductive aluminum hulls generated powerful eddy currents, causing them to vibrate violently at carefully chosen frequencies. In effect, the small boats were turned into giant, unintended speakers, broadcasting a false acoustic profile that closely matched the roar of LM-2-500 gas turbine engines. To the mine sensors below, each Iranian boat now sounded like a U.S. destroyer. At the same time, the ship streamed AN/SLQ 25 Nixie decoys underwater, producing fake magnetic pulses to pull the minefield's attention away from the real target. Then came the final layer, a wideband jamming beam that severed the enemy's tactical data links, leaving the Iranian formation cut off from shared targeting and coordination. The Wolfpack suddenly lost cohesion. Blind and disoriented, the fast attack craft began colliding with one another and bunching together in the very zone they had prepared for the American ship. That was the turning point. The EM-53 Minefield's AI was now overloaded. Instead of detecting one large American target, it saw a silent DeGauss destroyer, and, above it, 12 loud, magnetically active contacts maneuvering frantically in hypersensitive range. Its recognition logic was deceived completely. To the mines, the Iranian boats had just become the highest priority targets. "Prepare for impact," the captain ordered across the ship's internal speakers. Below the surface, the remaining 35 mines received their attack command. Hydraulic locks snapped open. Superconducting propulsion units pushed the weapons free of their moorings. As they reached attack depth, they entered supercavitation mode, wrapping themselves in bubbles to reduce drag and surging through the water at up to 200 knots toward the strongest simulated signatures, the Iranian speedboats. A moment later, the surface of the Strait of Hormuz erupted. Towering water columns rose 30 meters into the air. The lightly built aluminum boats were torn apart by the very system they had intended for the American ship. The blast pressure hurled fragments of burning metal and wreckage into the side of USS Jack H. Lucas. Then came the escape order. Flank speed, hard rudder. All 4 LM-2500 gas turbines roared back to life, unleashing 100,000 horsepower as the destroyer surged forward in a zigzag sprint through the gap. At that exact moment, a stray mine burst from the water like a steel predator and shot toward the command tower. The phalanx CIWS switched into manual override by the weapons officer, spun instantly, and filled the air with 20mm tungsten rounds at 4,500 rounds per minute, slicing the mine apart before it could strike the ship. On shore, the Gadir missile batteries lost their targeting picture. Electromagnetic interference from the Sea-Whip system, combined with the dense smoke rising from the burning wreckage, screened the destroyer from clear detection. Against every expectation, the $2 billion warship passed through the trap and escaped without launching a single offensive shot. An unconventional victory was written into the log. USS Jack H. Lucas pushed south into safer waters beyond the most dangerous stretch of the strait. Behind it, the sea was still boiling with foam, smoke, and the remains of the Iranian formation slowly slipping under the surface. The Spy-6 radar shifted back to long-range surveillance, but inside the command room, no one relaxed. Every eye turned toward the vertical launch system. Not one hatch had opened. No Tomahawks were fired in retaliation. This was not hesitation. It was deliberate restraint. Washington moved quickly through diplomatic channels in Ankara, stating that the U.S. Navy had acted only in non-lethal self-defense, and that the catastrophic losses resulted from a malfunction within Iran's own weapons network. By avoiding a first strike on enemy territory, the United States denied Tehran a ready justification for a wider war and kept the door open for further negotiations. On the tactical level, the Americans had clearly prevailed. They broke out of a trap prepared over 48 hours without firing a single offensive round. Electronic warfare had demonstrated a level of dominance over conventional firepower that was impossible to ignore. Instead of merely defeating the enemy's weapons, the U.S. turned them inward, making the system collapse on its own operators. Psychologically, that impact may have cut deeper than any missile strike. And yet, there were no celebrations in the Pentagon. Military planners understood the hidden cost. Iran had lost a cluster of boats and an advanced minefield. But in return, it had gained something highly valuable: real-world data on U.S. jamming frequencies, system timing, and the response patterns of Flight 3 destroyers under extreme pressure. The price of breaking the trap was the exposure of some of America's most closely guarded electronic warfare capabilities. What happened in Hormuz on February 3, 2026 did not end with peace. Both sides understood that this was only an opening move. The United States used speed, discipline, and innovation to remove the blade from its throat. But the blade itself was still there, and already being sharpened again in the dark. The EM-53 source code would almost certainly be rewritten that very night to resist signal simulation. And one question remained hanging over the entire encounter. If next time Iran does not rely on mines, but deploys something even faster and harder to jam, will 28 seconds still be enough?